Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining the Best Practices for Writing a SAMHSA Grant webinar. My name is Josh Shapiro with Capital Consulting. To ask a question during the webinar, please click the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen, and we will answer your questions throughout the webinar. If you need any technical assistance, please also type your question or issue into the Q&A pod, and one of our techs will respond. Closed captioning is available by clicking the CC icon at the bottom of your screen. And finally, today's session is being recorded, and we will share the recording and PowerPoint slides in the coming week. I will now turn the webinar over to Dr. Tim Westlake with SAMHSA to officially kick things off.
Great. Thank you, Josh. Welcome, everyone. We're excited to see such a huge number of people joining us online today. This is one of the first webinars we've hosted for faith organizations in our 30-year history about grant availability and the grant application process. I'm Dr. Tim Westlake, Chief of Staff of SAMHSA, newly started here about 2 months ago. I come from a background in community-based emergency medicine with state and federal policy experience, also a personal journey of recovery. I'm going into my 30th year. I've always felt that I learned in the rooms that addiction is a physical disease with a spiritual cure, and I really believe that. I'm really excited to see the involvement that we're starting to see and encourage with faith-based organizations. I was appointed by President Trump and Secretary Kennedy to help lead SAMHSA and to broaden the way we approach behavioral health and addiction. In part, I'm here to expand who we work with and how we support them. I'm pleased to be a part of an administration that values faith, spirituality, and faith communities and wants to do all we can to work alongside all of you for the greater good. I'm hopeful today that this will be the start and continuation of meaningful partnerships, and that together we'll strengthen the life-saving work being done in communities through prevention, treatment, and recovery support. Here's what we know. Millions of people turn to faith and spiritual leaders for guidance during difficult times. And when someone is struggling with addiction, with mental health, with life, the first place they want to turn to and talk to is someone that they trust. We also know that 1 in 4 individuals are struggling with a mental illness or addiction, and 1 in 6 with addiction, and 1 in 12 with both. This means that for millions of people across the country who are struggling, the first conversation they have doesn't happen in a clinic or an office. It happens with you, with the faith leader, a person in their house of worship, a friend whom they know and trust. Trust is where healing begins, and service is where healing begins, and you are and can be where the healing starts. Faith communities reach people that our traditional health systems do not see or may never see, and that matters enormously. You're also often providing the things that make recovery possible, things like stable housing, connection, a sense of purpose, and belonging, critical to long-term sobriety and recovery. These are not nice add-ons. These are foundational principles. And our goals are simple, that faith communities should be real partners in care, not just an afterthought, and a part of the system from the ground up from the start. And that goes both ways. We want behavioral health providers talking and asking their patients about faith and spirituality, the role it plays in their life, their health, and recovery. I can't tell you the number of times in my 30-year emergency medicine journey where I practiced community medicine, emergency medicine full time, where I would ask a patient, they would come in with anxiety and depression. And one of the things I would ask them is about their spiritual life and say, maybe, you don't need a medication. Maybe, have you thought about getting connected to a church or a spiritual? And so I think it's critical. Part of this administration's charge and our efforts to host these webinars comes through the Great American Recovery Initiative. And this initiative calls for exactly this kind of conversation across all of government, healthcare, and communities. For too long, faith institutions have been left out of the work, and we're changing that with this administration and with you all here today. It's exciting to see more than 1,000 people on this webinar. When faith communities bring trust and SAMHSA brings resources and infrastructure, we can reach more people, support recoveries, save lives, restore families, and strengthen communities. Thank you to SAMHSA's Faith Engagement Team and Office of Financial Resources who organized this webinar, and we hope to be one of many more to come. I'm glad to hand things over now to Mr. Ben Odell, the Senior Advisor at HHS Center of Faith, an expert on this space and one of our most trusted and important partners. Thanks, Ben.
Dr. Westlake, thanks so much for those kind words and the great introduction and welcome for us to think about the ways in which you all can be part of the work, the important work that's going on in local communities. Again, my name is Ben Odell. I serve within the Center for Faith here at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Bring greetings. It was so great to have Dr. Monty Burks with you all last time on this webinar, talking about the important ways in which you can learn about building out your capacity to be part of these programs. The mission of the HHS Center for Faith is to integrate trusted community capacity into federal systems to improve outcomes for people and communities. So I thought I might break that down a little bit and integrate it into the webinar today. First, that trusted community capacity is exactly what Dr. Westlake was talking about. We know that you all, as community members, as faith leaders in your communities, have the trust of the community and are connected to people who other systems may not connect to. We want to integrate you into federal systems. And this webinar today is attempting to try and help you think about the ways you can be part of these systems of care in each of your states, in each of your communities, in each of your neighborhoods. And think about the ways you can connect that trust, that honored relationship that you have with the community to the systems of care for people who need them. And then we know that when we do that, when we build that, when we leverage that trust, when we engage it in federal systems, we're going to improve outcomes for people in need in our communities across the country. So thank you for being here today. Thank you for taking time out of your day or watching the recording so that you can better understand some of the ways that you can strengthen your organization. So let me, as a wrap up, encourage you with one thing. Let you in on a little secret here for our webinar today, something that you won't hear other places. So we're going to talk about writing a narrative and preparing a budget and what it looks like to submit a grant. Here's the thing. Whether or not you submit a grant or not, you should be prepared to share the narrative of your organization. You should be able to tell people about the amazing work that you do in local communities. You should have a budget that supports that narrative and helps more people think about the ways that you have thought through and structured your budget in such a way to be as effective in the use and the implementation of that narrative as possible. And then you should know about systems where you can tell other people about that so that you can support that budget, so that you can support that narrative and make a difference in more people's lives in every community and life that you touch in the work moving forward. So thank you for taking time out of your day to learn some of these things. I hope you succeed in applying for federal grants, but even more so, I know that as a part of your participation in this webinar, you're going to strengthen your organization. You're going to strengthen the work you're doing in your local community. And as a result, we're going to hear about here in DC the amazing outcomes that you've achieved by participating in this webinar today. So it's my honor to hand you over to Dr. Rochelle Espiritu, who's doing some amazing work at SAMHSA, connecting and building all these relationships out. She's going to lead us into the next section and tell us more about what we're going to talk about today. Rochelle?
Thank you. Thank you so much to Dr. Westlake and Mr. Odell, and most importantly to all of you again for spending your time here with us today. We're already off to a great start. Again, my name is Dr. Rochelle Espiritu. I serve as the director of SAMHSA's Office of Minority Health and as the strategic lead for our faith-based initiatives. And I have to say that being in this role at this moment feels like exactly the right place to be. So before we start to get into the substance of the session, just want to take a moment to quickly ground us in who we are and why this work matters. And you can see on the slides that we have our agency overview here for you to read. This is the work that we're charged with doing. Our job is to make sure that you and communities have what you need to serve people across the nation well. And we'll just go on. I'll just actually move us really quickly into who our speakers are today from the Office of Financial Resources. We have Samantha Doc Herbster, who is a management analyst, and Jasmine Magruder, who is a review systems specialist, to walk us through today's webinar. It is packed. We will have time for questions, and we will be answering questions along the way, as Josh mentioned. So please put those in there as we move along. And I'll pass it over to you first, Samantha. Thank you.
Thank you, Rochelle. Good afternoon, everyone. Here is our agenda for today's webinar. Part 1, we are going to go through applying for a SAMHSA grant. Part 2, responding to the evaluation criteria. Part 3, participation protection and human subjects guidelines. Part 4, required forms of an application. Part 5, submitting the application. And Part 6, technical assistance and resources. Next slide, please. Okay, we are going to get started with Part 1, applying for a SAMHSA grant. Next slide, please. When applying for a SAMHSA grant, the first step is to gather information and data. This includes compiling data on substance use and/or mental health issues impacting your community. If your community does not have data on behavioral health issues available, reach out to other sources, such as the state agency responsible for behavioral health services, or visit the SAMHSA website at www.samhsa.gov/data. Next slide, please. Continuing with gathering information and data. Identify opportunities for gathering information on the extent of need and service gaps in your community. Engage community leaders, network with other agencies in the community, and/or form a consortia with other communities who share similar behavioral health concerns. Next slide, please. Next, you will want to develop a work plan. Develop a work plan and identify staff who will be responsible for different tasks. Please refer to guidance in the Developing a Competitive SAMHSA Grant Application Manual, Appendix D, page 47. Identify who will be served in your community by the grant, for example, youth and young adults, and outline goals and measurable objectives for your work plan. Next slide, please. When applying for a SAMHSA grant, you will need to reference 2 documents: the Notice of Funding Opportunity, or NOFO, and the Application Guide. The NOFO includes program-specific requirements, details unique to this funding opportunity. And the Application Guide is standard SAMHSA application instructions. These are baseline instructions used across SAMHSA applications. A key rule when using these guides together: when requirements differ, follow the current NOFO and the current application guide. Always check that you are using the most recent versions before submitting your application. Next slide, please. Now we will continue to Part 2, where I will go over evaluation criteria that is found in the NOFO and responses. Next slide, please. The project narrative is the portion of the application where you will be including your responses to the NOFO evaluation criteria. There are generally 4 or 5 sections in the project narrative. These include Section A, Population of Focus and Statement of Need; Section B, Proposed Implementation Approach; Section C, Proposed Evidence-Based Service and Practice; Section D, Staff and Organizational Experience; and Section E, Data Collection and Performance Measurement. Next slide, please. Continuing with the project narrative evaluation criteria. Most NOFOs have a limit of 10 pages for the project narrative. Some key points to remember when developing your project narrative. Make sure you put letter and number before each evaluation criterion section response. For example, A1, A2, B1, B2. Pay attention to the points and recommended page limit for each section. For example, Section A may have a maximum of 25 points, and the guidance is that this should take up approximately 2 pages of your project narrative. Some NOFOs have bonus points that may be applicable to the applicant. You need to provide necessary detail and precise language in responses. Make sure to follow formatting requirements. Do not direct reviewers to information in another evaluation criteria section or in an attachment. And pay attention to evaluative screen-out information. Again, please keep the response within the NOFO page limit that is outlined in your funding opportunity. Next slide, please. Here's an example of an evaluation criterion with multiple components. This example has 3 components that must be addressed. So this component has the 3 components. 1, identify other organizations that you will partner with in the proposed project. 2, describe their experience providing services to the populations of focus. And 3, include their specific roles and responsibilities for the project. It is important, if there are multiple components to a criterion, that all are addressed. Next slide, please. Here is another example of an evaluation criterion with multiple components, this time 6 components. First component, provide a complete list of staff positions for the project, including the key personnel, project director, and other significant personnel. And then for each staff member, describe their 2, role, 3, level of effort, and 4, qualifications, to include their 5, experience providing services to the populations of focus, and 6, experience working with underserved populations. Again, all components of the criterion must be addressed. Next slide, please. I am now going to provide examples of section descriptions and criteria for sections A through E. These responses were obtained from the NOFO Treatment and Recovery Services for Youth, Young Adults, and Families, NOFO number TI 25003. All identifying information regarding the applicant organization has been removed from this presentation. Next slide, please. So section A is our population of focus and statement of need section. And so here's the evaluative criteria you can expect for section A. So subsection A1, identify the individuals you will serve and identify the geographic catchment area where you will deliver services. Subsection A2, provide a demographic profile of the individuals you will serve. That includes age, sex, male, female, socioeconomic status, clinical characteristics, veteran status, and system involvement, criminal justice, service, social services, child welfare. And subsection A3, describe why there is a need for this project, including any service gaps experienced by populations with higher prevalence of behavioral health conditions. Current prevalence rates or incidence data must be used to document the need, and the data sources must be identified. And for subsection A3, citations may be included in an attachment. Next slide, please. Subsection A1, population of focus and looking at the catchment area. So clearly identify the individuals to be served, which is your population of focus, and the geographic catchment area for your proposed project. Next slide, please. Here's an example of a response within an adequate detail for subsection A1. The critique of this response is, while the applicant organization identifies the individuals it will serve, it does not specifically identify the geographic catchment area for the proposed project. So in the response, the applicant organization provides information about 4 cities, but does not specifically identify the geographic catchment areas for the proposed project. Next slide, please. Here is a response to subsection A1 with adequate detail. The highlighted information provides details for the project, including population of focus, which is youth ages 12 to 17, young adults 18 to 25, and their families. And it also identifies the geographic catchment area for the proposed project, which is Kent County, Michigan. Next slide, please. Subsection A2, population of focus and the demographics. So provide the demographic information about the population of focus. If you indicate that there is a high percentage of specific groups in the population of focus, such as underserved populations or veterans, make sure you address how the needs of these individuals will be met in the project. And that should also be done through the rest of the project narrative in sections B, C, and/or D. Next slide, please. Here's an example of an inadequate response for subsection A2. The critique of this response is, while the applicant organization identifies that it will primarily serve low-income families who speak English, it does not provide a demographic profile for the individuals, specifically identifying or describing the individuals in terms of age, sex, clinical characteristics, etc. So again, this response lacks a demographic profile of several elements for the population of focus. Next slide, please. Here's an example of an adequate response to subsection A2. So information can be provided in table or narrative form. So in this example, we can see that this applicant organization provided demographic information for the geographic catchment area, which is Kent County, Michigan, and also provided another column for Harborview demographic information. But they have listed all of their demographic criterion on the left side and have included percentages for each of those demographic profile elements. Next slide, please. Subsection A3, Statement of Need. In your description of the statement of need, make sure you reference the most current data you have access to and provide citations in an attachment. If your catchment area is a local community, it is not sufficient to just cite national or state data. Provide data specific to your community. So local data specific to the population of focus in your community. Next slide, please. Continuing with subsection A3, Statement of Need. If your project will provide services to a specific population, such as youth and young adults, make sure the statement of need provides data specific to this population. For example, if your project will focus on suicide prevention, provide documentation of suicide rates for youth and young adults in your geographic catchment area. Next slide, please. Here's an example of a response with inadequate details for subsection A3. The critique of this response is, while the applicant organization provides prevalence rates and incidence data with citations to document the extent of youth drug use in the state, it does not actually describe the need relating the data back to the project, any current efforts, nor does it describe any service gaps experienced by the population of focus, which may be impacted by the proposed project. Next slide, please. And here's an example of a response with adequate detail for subsection A3. The highlighted information includes details with prevalence rates and incidence data. There's also information about the service gaps being experienced in this area and the needs of the community as it relates to the funding opportunity, and it ties it back to the data. Next slide, please. How to address population of focus in sections B through D. Section B, outline goals and measurable objectives to address problems and service gaps existing in the catchment area for the population of focus, and address all required activities as they relate to your population of focus. Section C, identify evidence-based practices that will be implemented in the project. You must discuss the populations for which the practices have been shown to be effective and show that they are appropriate for your population of focus. And Section D, describe the qualifications of staff for the project. Specifically address the experience of staff providing services to the individuals to be served. Identify other organizations you will partner with to address the needs of this population. Next slide, please. The next section of the project narrative evaluation criteria is Section B, Proposed Implementation Approach. So in this example, we can see that the maximum number of points is 30 that could be received, and that the guidance is that this should take up approximately 5 pages of your project narrative. So subsection B1, describe the goals and measurable objectives of your proposed project. They must align with the statement of need in subsection A3. State the unduplicated number of youth and young adults you propose to serve annually and over the entire project period with award funds. Subsection B2, describe how you will implement all the required activities in step 2, recalling that services must begin within 4 months of receiving the award. Subsection B3, describe how your proposed implementation approach will address SAMHSA strategic priorities. These priorities can be found in the Developing a Competitive SAMHSA Grant Application Guide, page 7. And this is a new 2026 requirement, so there is not an example provided in this presentation. But please refer to the application guide for additional information. And subsection B4, in attachment 4, provide no more than a 2-page chart or graph depicting a realistic timeline for the entire 5 years of the program. It must include dates, key activities, which are the section 1 required activities, and responsible staff. Indicate when service delivery will begin. The timeline does not count towards the page limit for the program narrative. So if the project narrative is 10 pages, the 2-page chart for the timeline does not count towards that 10 pages. But there is a page limit for the timeline, and that is 2 pages. Next slide, please. All right, subsection B1, goals and measurable objectives. Develop realistic goals and measurable objectives. Refer to Developing a Competitive SAMHSA Grant Application Manual, page 22. The goals and measurable objectives must align with the statement of need outlined in section A. Objectives must be linked to specific goals. Reference how you will collect data for the identified objectives in the section on data collection and performance measurement. And when we state that goals must be measurable, we are referring to SMART format goals, which stands for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely or time-bound. Next slide, please. Here's an example of SMART objectives for subsection B1. Both the goal and objectives align with the statement of need in subsection A3 as seen in the 3rd column. So the goal for this is provide comprehensive training for SUD and COD treatment for youth and young adults within the service area. One of their objectives is to train 100% of staff in evidence-based practices by 3 months. And they link that back to the need in subsection A3 by stating a more robust treatment approach to address SUD and co-occurring mental illnesses. Next slide, please. Here's an example of non-SMART objectives. The critique of the applicant organization's response is, while the applicant organization describes how it will measure outcomes, it does not provide any goals or measurable objectives that are SMART. Again, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. Nor does it relate back to the needs discussed in subsection A3. Next slide, please. Next is subsection B2, implementing the required activities. These are found in the NOFO. So address all the required activities. Clearly delineate your response to each of the activities. And include sufficient detail, the how, where, why, when, what, and who. Next slide, please. Here's an example of some of the required activities from TI 25003. These required activities range from enrolling a certain number of youth each year of the proposed project, which is number 1, to collaborating with organizations that specialize in serving youth and young adults in several areas, number 5, and providing treatment to youth, young adults, or family members who meet a diagnosis criteria for SUD. Number 7. Again, it is very important to address all of the required activities from the NOFO. Next slide, please. Continuing with implementing the required activities for subsection B2. Information that may be included in the response. Who will create the education? What topics will be covered and what format will the education be in? Who will oversee distribution of the education? Who will the education be provided to? Where and when will the education take place, if applicable? What specific education or outreach strategies will be implemented? Why were these strategies chosen? Are the strategies appropriate for the characteristics of the population of focus? And how will you evaluate whether the education and outreach efforts are successful? Next slide, please. Here's an example of a response with inadequate detail for subsection B2. The critique of this applicant organization's response is, the applicant organization states that all newly hired staff will receive Wheels of Change training and that it will obtain licenses to provide services in Massachusetts, but it does not describe what services will be provided or how it will ensure that services are designed to meet the needs of clients being served. Overall, the applicant does not provide the how, where, why, when, what, or who for this criteria. And again, that information needs to be provided for all of the required activities that are outlined in the specific NOFO you are applying for. Next page, please. Next slide, please. Here's an example of a response with adequate detail for subsection B2. The highlighted information provides details needed for the required activity, including the how, where, why, when, what, and who, that is needed to convey how the applicant organization will implement this required activity for its proposed project. Next slide, please. The next evaluative criterion I will discuss for section B is subsection B3, the project timeline. So develop a realistic timeline, no more than 2 pages, for the entire project period, not just the first year. So if the NOFO you are applying for is for 5 years, the timeline should encompass the full 5 years of the proposed project. The project timeline is a separate attachment, and again, those 2 pages are not included in the 10-page limit or whatever the page limit is for the specific NOFO for which you are applying. Keep it simple. Identify responsible staff for each key activity, not just the overall organization. Include requirements outlined in the NOFO, which includes starting services within 4 months, the key required activities, responsible staff, and key activities must include the requirements outlined in section 1 of the NOFO. And refer to a sample timeline in the Developing a Competitive SAMHSA Grant Application Manual, Appendix B, page 41. Next slide, please. Here's an example of a subsection B3 project timeline. This timeline includes a key at the bottom for the responsible staff, all key activities, key dates, and it indicates when service delivery will begin. Furthermore, the timeline encompasses the whole 5 years of the proposed project. And again, this timeline example is 1 page, but please reference your NOFO for the page limit on the timeline. It is typically 2 pages, so you can go up to 2 pages on your timeline. Next slide, please. Okay, at this time, I will turn the presentation over to my colleague, Jasmine Magruder, who will continue speaking about the NOFO evaluation criteria.
Thanks, Samantha. Okay, so for section C, the proposed evidence-based services or practices, this section's usually broken up into 3 parts. So for C1, you must identify the specific evidence-based practices or EBPs you will use. You need to discuss why each chosen intervention is appropriate for the individuals you plan to serve. And if you need to make any modifications, that would be in C2, to the evidence-based practice, you must describe them and justify why they are necessary. And then finally, You must explain your plan to monitor fidelity and ensure the practice is being delivered as intended. HHS actually has a fidelity monitoring checklist for reference. It's hyperlinked there, so that's a really good resource when developing this section. Next slide, please. So when selecting your EBPs, be sure to clearly identify them by name and provide a justification for their use that is tied directly to your population of focus and your project goals. It's crucial to be realistic to implement all of your EBPs. SAMHSA also has a evidence-based practices resource center on our site that provides you more information on what types of EBPs would be appropriate, and it's just a great tool. Next slide. Okay, so here we have an example that would be an inadequate response to this section. So the organization is proposing family-centered treatment recovery as their EBP, but specific information is not provided addressing how the EBPs are appropriate to the population of focus or the outcomes this applicant wants to achieve. So for example, how these EBPs are appropriate for its populations, which would be ages 12 to 17 or ages 18 to 25 with substance use disorder and or co-occurring disorder. So that information would have strengthened this section if they included it. Next slide. Okay, so here is a response that we would deem adequate. So the applicant here, it clearly explains the appropriateness of the two EBPs. It describes trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy and its specific phases, showing how it addresses trauma in youth. It then describes Prime for Life as a stage-matched intervention for youth who are ambivalent about their substance use. So this shows a specific and tailored approach to treatment. Next slide. Okay, section D, staff and organizational experience. This is typically broken up into 3 bullets or subsections. 15 points is typically how much it's worth in the application, but as Samantha said previously, it can vary from NOFO to NOFO. So in this section, this is where you're going to demonstrate that your organization is capable of successfully executing the project, right? So you need to describe your organization's experience with similar projects and with serving your population of focus. If you are partnering with other organizations, you need to describe their experience and roles and be sure to include letters of commitment in attachment 1. And then finally, you're going to provide a complete list of your project staff with their roles, level of effort, and detailed qualifications. Next slide. Thanks. So for D1 and D2, for your organizational experience, be specific. Don't just list previous grants that you've been awarded. You want to explain how your current experience aligns with the grant. So for your partners, it is not enough to just simply describe the services they currently provide, right? You need to specify their exact role in the project that you're applying for and document their experience serving your specific population of focus. And of course, always remember to include their letters of commitment to your organization in attachment 1. So you want to make sure you include attachment 1 for each partnering organization that will be working with you for the grant. Next slide. Okay, so here is a response that we would deem inadequate. And it's inadequate because it does indicate that it's administered family-related projects. It doesn't provide specific information on any of the organization's own experience with similar projects, right? Or providing services to the population of focus to serve youth. So they identify, programs that they have, but they're not tying it back to their population of focus, and really giving us the details for their own experience. Next slide. So here would be a response that we would deem adequate, that gives us the information we need. So it's a great response because it clearly states that the applicant will be the lead provider and draws on their nearly 3 decades of experience. It describes its mission, its history of serving the target population, and the continuum of services it already offers with which includes a well-established history of serving youth and young adults with substance use disorders and co-occurring mental health conditions. So this paints a clear picture of an experienced organization that would be prepared to manage the grant. Next slide. Okay, so for D3, your project staff, when you're describing this, you want to make sure that the level of effort, or LOE, for your key personnel is sufficient for them to effectively carry out their responsibilities. You must include all of the required information for each staff member. So that's their qualifications, so like degrees, certifications, the level of effort as percentage, their role in the project, and their specific experience serving the population of focus you want to serve. So a resume is simply not enough. You must provide this information in the narrative, and also make sure all staff listed in the budget that you have are described here as well. And additionally, I just wanted to add some, as Samantha mentioned earlier, please don't reference another attachment. So say, for example, attachment 5 is where you would be uploading your resumes. Please don't say here, please refer to attachment 5. That is not acceptable. You need to make sure that you're including all of the information here in regards to the personnel for your organization. Next slide. Okay, so here would be a response that we would deem inadequate. So, the applicant, they're listing the practitioners, the peer recovery support specialist, the supervisor, they're talking about the project director and her experience and her certification, but it is inadequate because they did not provide information for each designated staff person or their qualifications, roles, level of effort, or experience with the population. So they didn't include all of the positions for the program. They only included the project director. And also, for reference, for this NOFO, the project coordinator is one of the key personnel, which was not mentioned here. So you need to make sure when you're doing this, when you're completing this section, that you're including all required key personnel that's listed in the NOFO, as well as any other members. Next slide. Okay, so here is a response that would be adequate, right? So they list the project director, they include her level of effort, they talk about what her role will be in the project, her master's degree, so that's her qualifications, 30 years of experience in behavioral health, and her experience with vulnerable youth populations. And they did the same for the project coordinator and the peer recovery coach. So this is a good example. They're including all of the personnel for this program. They have the level of effort, everything that's required for this section. And this demonstrates a clear outline of the personnel for this project. Next slide. Just for a level of effort specification, just to clarify what key personnel level of effort is and what they mean. So key personnel are staff members who are considered essential to the project's success, regardless of whether they are paid by the grant. These staff members make a substantial contribution to the execution of the project. So say, for example, the NOFO will often specify a minimum level of effort for these positions. So say, for example, the project director may need to commit to 0.1 FTE or 10% of their time to the project. And then the project coordinator will be dedicated to the project full-time at 1.0 FTE. So those are just some of examples of what the requirements may be for this section. Next slide. So for section E, data collection and performance measurement, this section can range from 20 to 10 points. It just depends on the NOFO. You would see for this, it'd be broken up into 2 subsections. So this is where you must describe how you will collect the data needed to measure your program objectives. Additionally, you must describe how you will use that data to manage, monitor, and enhance your program. As Samantha mentioned previously, we have the application guide, but there's also a developing the plan for data collection and performance measurement on our site. It has really good information on what you should be including in this section. Next slide, please. So for data collection and performance measurement, when you're describing your plan for data collection, here are some of the things that you want to consider addressing, right? So we want to make sure that this section is very specific. So you want to include what software you will use, how often will data be collected, who on your staff will be responsible for collecting data, what data sources and instruments will be used, how will you ensure that data is collected, and what are your procedures for keeping data secure and protecting confidentiality, including obtaining informed consent. So these are some critical components for this section that you want to make sure that you are including when you're writing section E. Next slide. So a lot of information here, I know. So despite a lot of information on the screen here, this response would be deemed inadequate. And that's because the applicant organization, they do identify several data collections tools, but as you're reading through their paragraph, they don't clearly describe how these tools that they're using will help measure the project specific goals and measurable objectives, as these were not clearly defined in section B of the application. So it's important to note, if your goals and objectives are not SMART, as Samantha mentioned earlier, it'll be difficult to develop this section. So you want to make sure that you are following the SMART logic when you're creating your goals and objectives. Additionally, here, the applicant doesn't specify which staff member or role will be responsible for overseeing the collection and analysis of data. And furthermore, the plan does not appear to mention how SAMHSA mandated data will be collected and reported. So those bullets that I mentioned earlier, you want to make sure that you include that here when completing the data collection portion. Next slide. Okay, so here would be an example of an adequate response for section E, right? So much stronger. So it starts by stating that the organization will comply with all SAMHSA data requirements. It clearly lists the primary data sources, including the GIPR tool and an electronic health record. It specifies who will collect the data and when and how it will be entered into SAMHSA's reporting system, and how qualitative data will be gathered through focus groups. So this is a comprehensive plan that pretty much checks off all the boxes. Next slide. So just another example here of what would be considered an inadequate response. So again, the applicant here does mention a quality improvement team here. We see that they're talking about how they're going to discuss the results with the family and etc. But while the applicant describes the quality improvement process, the effectiveness of this process appears to be limited by the lack of clearly defined goals and objectives earlier in the narrative. So again, if your goals and objectives are not SMART, it's going to be difficult to describe this portion of the application, so your data collection and how you're going to monitor data, enhance your program. So please keep that in mind when you are developing your grant application. So without clearly established targets, it's difficult to determine how the proposed data will be effectively used, again, to manage, monitor, and enhance the program toward its intended outcomes. Next slide. So here would be an adequate response for section E. So here the applicant discusses how de-identified data will be stored securely on the evaluator's encrypted server and will only be accessible to evaluation staff. So it outlines a clear structure for reviewing data with monthly electronic reviews and quarterly meetings of an implementation work group. It demonstrates a commitment to continuous quality improvement, or CQI, by using data to identify challenges and improve services for all participants. So this is the information that you would want to include when you're developing this section. Next slide. Okay, so now we will have an overview of the participant protection for human subjects. And if this is applicable to whatever NOFA you're applying to, there can be up to 7 elements that must be addressed. Thank you. So when responding to participant protection and human subjects guidelines, it's mandatory that you address all of the SAMHSA participant protection and human subjects guidelines. So it is mandatory. This is required for any grant that involves delivering services, training, or building capacity. For each element and bullet point in the guidelines, you must provide a response. If a point is not applicable to your project, you must state not applicable and briefly explain why. There are no page limits for this section. It's important to also note that if your project plan must be approved by an institutional review board or IRB, you still must address all of the participant protection issues and corresponding bullet statements. And also, simply inserting your organization's policy and procedure manual is not acceptable. You must address all of the elements that are included for the NOFO. Next slide. So the core of these guidelines is to ensure that you have safeguards in place to protect individuals from risk associated with your project. So you must address 7 key elements. So that would be, depending on your NOFO, that would be the protection of clients and staff from potential risks, the fair selection of participants, the absence of coercion, data collection procedures, privacy and confidentiality, and finally, a discussion of the risks and benefits of participation. Next slide. So on this slide that I'm reading, and the next slide will be the 7 elements and with their description. It's really important that you read through this information to have a full understanding of each element as you're developing your application. So when you see your NOFO and you're going to look at, I believe, attachment 6 for participant protection, you want to make sure that you are paying attention to which elements you're supposed to be completing. So for protection from risks, you must discuss potential risks, even if they are minimal. You must include them and how you will assist participants in the event of an adverse effect and whether alternative treatment will be available. We'll put this out there. It's very unlikely that there will be no foreseeable risks associated with your project. So you need to make sure you complete this element. For fair selection, you must describe your recruitment process, including your inclusion and exclusion criteria, and how you will ensure fairness and how potential participants will be informed of the voluntary nature of participation. For absence of coercion, you must make it clear that participants can receive services even if they choose not to participate in the data collection component. Also, please note, if you indicate that you do not plan to compensate participants or give incentives, but then describe the use of incentives in the project narrative, anywhere in the project narrative, this will be noted by the reviewer as inadequate. So just be mindful that there's consistency for your participant protection and project narrative, and there's no discrepancy there. Next slide. So for the remaining elements, you have data collection. So in this section, you must describe your data collection procedures and identify the instruments you will use. So that would be either links to the websites for the instruments or the actual copy of the data collection protocols themselves. And this would be located in attachment 2 of your grant application. For privacy and confidentiality, you need to provide detailed information about how data will be stored securely and who will have access. Additionally, you must specify agreement to maintain confidentiality of alcohol and drug misuse, client records according to the provisions of Title 42, the Code of Federal Regulations, Part 2. And then for adequate consent procedures, you must describe your process for obtaining consent, how you obtain consent from different populations, and include sample consent forms in this attachment. And then finally, for the risk-benefit discussion, you must describe any risk associated with participation and why they are reasonable compared to the anticipated benefits to participants involved in the project. You cannot indicate that there are no risks to participants in the first element and that this element is not applicable. So again, that's why I said earlier, even if it's a minimal risk, you still need to address it because then, depending on your NOFO, you will then have to complete this element. Next slide. So it is critical to address this section thoroughly and completely to avoid any issues with your application. So let's say in the event that you do not provide a satisfactory response to the participant protection guidelines, a special term and condition secondary to the PPC or participant protection concern will be placed on the award. The weaknesses in your response will be detailed in the notice of award. excuse me. And until the PPC is resolved, funds to provide services will be restricted and may only be used for hiring of staff. So within 30 days of the award, you will be required to submit a response with an ERA that addresses the PPC identified in your application. So it is very critical and imperative that you answer this section thoroughly, accurately, and that you make sure you address all the elements that are required. Next slide. Okay, so let's quickly review the standard required forms that are part of every application package. Next slide. So forms that must be submitted, as Samantha mentioned previously, the fiscal 2026 application guide, it's on pages 8 through 11. It'll walk through what forms you should be completing. But here, so we have the SF424, which is the application for federal assistance form. To me, that's how I remember it's like the main application form here. You have the SF424A, which is the budget information non-construction programs form, which is basically detailing your budget. And then you have your project performance site locations form. So here, this is where you it requires the physical address of where the work you'll be doing will be done. At minimum, you would need your organization name, UEI number. The street must be a physical address, not a PO box. The city, state, country, and zip code, and the congressional district should be completed and include the same information on the SF424 and in SAMHSA.gov. So all of that information that you're putting for the SF424 should be identical also in SAMHSA.gov. And also you'd be required to complete the disclosure of lobbying activities form. So you must complete that form. Next slide. And then additional forms that may need to be completed with your application. So you have the other attachments form. You have for projects providing substance use disorder treatment or prevention services only, they would have to complete the charitable choice form, which is the SMA 170 form. It is required. It must be submitted. As I mentioned earlier, the biographical sketches and position descriptions form, that's attachment 5, that must be included. And then, as I just discussed, the confidentiality and SAMHSA participant protection / human subjects attachment 6 form. So again, that's why I said it depends on your NOFO, and depends on the grant that you're applying to, because if you have a service grant, it would be section D, which will tell you which elements you're specifically supposed to respond to. Same thing with training grants and capacity building. So make sure you're reading carefully for attachment 6, and you're not, putting extra work on yourself and including elements that are not required. So keep that in mind. Next slide. Okay, so when completing the SF424, there are a number of fields that you have to complete, which is part of the SAMHSA grant application. So some examples of that would be Section 8A. You would be entering your legal name, and it must match the entity legal name in SAM.gov. It is the same organization that's registered with SAM.gov and the IRS. Another field you'd be filling out is your EIN number. So make sure you include the suffix, and it must, once again, match your EIN associated with your UEI. A lot of acronyms here. UEI and SAM.gov. You're also going to be required to include your organizational unit. So if your application or if your organization has a department or division, you want to list it here. Enter the name of the primary organizational unit, department, or division that will undertake the assistance of activity. And then you want to enter your entity type and the name of what your organization is. Okay, so we're almost done. Let's go to the next slide and slide after. Thank you. So please do not wait until the last minute to submit your application, because we know technology can fail us. You have technical issues. So submitting a few days early gives you time to address any submission errors that may arise. Next slide. Thanks. So there's difference between errors and warning. An error will stop application processing, and it must be corrected before submission. A warning is it does not stop application processing, but you need to correct it at your discretion. Next slide. Once you have successfully submitted your application, your job is to monitor your email from grants.gov and ERA Commons. They will both confirm that your application has been received and validated, and after that, the application goes into the review process, and you'll be notified whether or not you've been funded. Next slide. So we have lots of resources to set you guys up for success. Next slide. As we mentioned previously, developing a competitive grant application manual, great resources to help you start the process. Next slide, please. We have other resources here with ERA Help Desk, ERA Assist, how to apply for a SAMHSA grant with tutorial videos. And once again, developing competitive SAMHSA grant applications. So just a lot of great resources for you all to use to make sure your application will be successful. Next slide. Again, just more links for you all to reference to make sure you are set up for success when you start this process. Next slide. We know that your organization is already on the front lines doing the hard work every day. So SAMHSA's faith engagement resources are designed to support you in that work. We offer toolkits, training opportunities, and a growing network of faith partners. So this guidance is just another tool here that we have to help you get the funding you need to sustain and expand your vital community services. If you want to stay connected with us, please reach out to us to engagement@samhsa.hhs.gov. And that is all I have.
Great. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, Samantha, and all. It has been, you have gone through a lot of slides, a lot of content, Jasmine. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you again to our team from the Office of Financial Resources for responding to nearly 60 questions in the Q&A. It is amazing that you all are here in the room. We know it's not easy. Writing a federal grant is hard work. You are here because you believe your communities deserve more support and you're willing to do what it takes to get it, and that means a great deal to us. Please come back to our website, samhsa.gov/faith. We will have the recordings and the PowerPoints from both sessions on there, so we encourage you to use them, share them, come back to them as you work on your applications. And if you need support along the way, there are many resources available on our website as well. So again, there is so much more to come. We're just getting started. We have a lot more to do, but thank you for being with us today. Have a good rest of your day. Bye-bye.